And so that's what we have in front of us. That's what's posted. That's the process that we're in right now, is to see whether or not the negotiated agreement is a yes that can gain and garner approval from the committees and the board that need to be approved. So that you'll recognize that tone, that is where this document, these provisions in particular that I'm talking about, they are written towards that end. They are a set of findings that the town board and the plan commission could accept as their evidence for supporting approval of the permit. If at some point the town decides to not move forward with approval, we'll obviously move in a different direction with respect to the written decision. So really the question tonight is whether or not this is a sufficient agreement on which to base approval. Okay? So in the particular provisions, if my page numbers aren't going to match, so I'm going to go by section numbers because I did redline version so I could pick out the differences. In section 1, there's a new provision which requires that Cooley provide a lake making plan to the town for town approval within 12 months of execution of this agreement, should it be exercised. And that agreement it must include groundwater and surface water quality monitoring and quantity assessment, shoreline development index, which is a measure of basically the usefulness of the shoreline for fish and other habitat, a depth and contour map for the lake, and there's some requirements here about the slopes and the depth of the lake that would be created. These recommendations came from Bar Engineering, which was a specialty consulting firm that the town hired to provide recommendations related to what might be included or required in this agreement so that the town could have a predictable expectation of a good resource, a good usable resource based on expectations. Next, in terms of the primary changes, there's some changes to the hours of operation in this document. One, the excavation preparation, this is in section 3.2 in terms of the definition. The excavation preparation activities were expanded, so that has a dual impact in the scheme of this, in how this fits together. One, it allows for, it narrows the hours that those additional activities can be conducted on the site, but it also eliminates the noise restrictions for those. So when you go to section 16 and back to section 3.2, these are connected, okay? So we're much more specific here than we were in the first version. We've identified a driveway entrance area, which is really the driveway that will come up the slope from Highway B to the main area. Those have been separated. It's in addition to, under the previous version, the creation of berms, those construction activities and prep activities and reclamation of those features also then are not subject to the noise restrictions, as there wouldn't be anything in between them and the exterior of the property. That isn't the location where you'd find those screening items, animal agriculture, livestock facilities. On section 7.1, the screening language was slightly changed to provide for some types of screening that had been requested by some of the neighbors. In other words, not necessarily having screening of the activities right at the boundary, but having internal screening to maintain the view shed for some of the neighbors, but to still keep them from seeing what's going on at the processing facility. So that was changed to accommodate those neighbor requests. On section 10, we have two changes related to stormwater containment. One, and these two are in particular in response to the town's other hired consultant, Kent Severson, who recommended that we pay additional attention to what impacts might accrue from problems with the stormwater system. And I think it's almost his exact words where we have 100-year storms all the time now. So this agreement has beefed up sort of the stormwater protections by requiring that all stormwater in the excavation area be fully internally drained, and that the stormwater containment for the processing area be twice what's required by law. It's doubled as compared to the last version of this. So that's twice the 100-year, 24-hour storm volume. So if everybody on the commission would also turn to section 15.2, because this is where we'll have a change as to what was posted as far as what's being suggested for your vote tonight. So the change in section 15.2 in the new version, this is a new section that requires Cooley to deal with one of the other concerns that was raised by Kent Severson, which was because the smallest mesh sand that we can find in this site is so small, his concern was that if there was a significant enough precipitation event that might slough or turn to mud and might cause problems in the stormwater system. So this provision requires that all stormwater from any stockpile, should it happen in the future, of small mesh sand, that stormwater not be allowed to move into the stormwater system. So the change as to what you see as what was posted, I had language about the elevation being the way that they would separate those things, and that was my mistake. The requirement is that they separate that completely and fully, so that no matter how much precipitation we get, that water coming from that pile will not enter the stormwater system, and so that's a requirement under this new version. And then in section 15.3, we have a requirement that Cooley use best management practices, or BMPs, to take care of the topsoil that they'll be stockpiling. It was also a recommendation of Mr. Severson that he said, should there be, in particular, too much compaction of topsoil, it makes it very hard to use that in reclamation in a way by which you can achieve good success. Section 16, we already talked about the things that are subject to that. I think I'll just walk through how this works and not just the changes, as there were a number of questions from people between the last meeting and this meeting about the noise restrictions. So Cooley is required under this provision to control off-site noise to the maximum extent practicable to avoid adverse impacts on neighboring properties. In particular, the noise levels at the boundaries of the mining or processing site, excluding off-site vehicle traffic, blasting activities, and what we just talked about, these excavation preparation activities, is not allowed to exceed 62.5 decibels A-weighted in an L10 measure, which means it can't be more than 62.5 decibels for more than 10% of the time. And that's during the general excavation hours, which under this agreement are established at 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Outside of those hours, the same DBA L10 measure is 60 decibels. The noise levels are required to be monitored at the mine site boundary. Cooley does that monitoring unless there is a complaint to the town about whether or not that somebody challenges the accuracy of that monitoring, in which case a third party would be required to do it. The tests have to occur continuously for a 10-day period each time that they're tested. And there are no compression release, engine brakes, or backup alarms other than white noise backup alarms allowed from a noise standpoint. In section 24.2, The agreement requires Carbo, who's the landowner, or who will be the landowner if this, for all parcels moving forward, to issue recreational easements to the town of Rock for each of the parcels that becomes eligible for the option to purchase, which I'm going to talk about right after this. I'll talk about them together. So the goal of this project is that the town will have ownership of created lake and park property when the mining is complete. And the way that the agreement is structured to allow for that is, if you look at the document, either the agreement or the option to purchase that are online, they both include a map in the exhibits that show how Cooley will break up this property into 14 different excavation areas, a processing plant area, and a driveway entrance area. So as soon as this is executed by the town and by Cooley and Carbo, the processing area, the driveway entrance area, and sections 13 and 14 will be subject to the offer to purchase, which means that if they stop mining, or if for some reason they're required to stop mining, the town, that's the first piece that the town acquires. So if they go no further, it would be those sections. And then as each of the sections is opened for mining and becomes subject to a reclamation requirement, that then gets added onto the list of property that the town would receive if at that point in time Cooley and Carbo cease operations. Okay? So this recreational easement provision is a part of that to protect against potential insolvency issues in the future. So what the town can expect between these two pieces is a growing parcel that would become what's required to be called Cooley Rock Park. The order that those parcels will be opened in this plan is listed in those documents, in both of those documents that are online. Another change in section 28.7, because Carbo is really the owner of the property and would be turning it over should there be mining operations cease. There's a provision which allows Carbo, should there be insolvency issues or other issues, violation issues or something with Cooley, it allows Carbo to step into those shoes, correct those issues before the property is taken or handed over, if you will, to the town. So those are the primary differences. There's quite a few tweaks. There's a few slight changes to the property value guarantee, and there's a few tweaks throughout that clarify and clean it up, but those are the main substantive differences, as we see from most of those coming from putting into effect the transfer of land or solidifying how that land would transfer at the end of mining processes, and then giving effect to the town's consultant's recommendations in terms of where they thought we could be a little bit more stringent.
I guess with that said, we're going to move on here to something that's been asked a lot, and I just want you guys to know we have been listening. You guys have some questions, and we've got a list of those questions, and we want to try to answer the previous questions tonight to the best of our ability. At this point, I am actually going to ask you again to speak on the questions that we have recorded since the last commission meeting.
So, thank you. The thing to remember, I don't want anybody to be offended, because there were quite a few emails and letters, and then we tried to sort of coordinate what comments people made that people took down in their notes during that meeting. And there may very well be some things missed here, but I tried to sort of combine questions into issue areas that we can talk through, and I'll try to do that now. I think it probably makes sense as we go through some of these to just see if there's something we're missing in this issue area rather than to
Right.
jump back.
Right.
So the first thing is, actually, a couple different people mentioned that it might be worthwhile to consider changing the speed limit on Highway V. And the chairman did talk to the county about that and suggest that there were people interested in having that conversation. And the county really said, that's our thing, but we are going to, the county said they are going to, once things are up and running, evaluate the traffic, evaluate the speed, and all, but the message was delivered. I think that the best thing anybody can do if they want to see that outcome, I live on a county highway, and the best thing you can do is communicate directly with your representatives at the county level, and make sure that they understand that there's an interest. I think that it's clear to the county at this point that the town is open to a discussion about that because they were approached by the town for that reason. There's been some questions about setbacks. The town's zoning ordinance is very thin on the setback question. Basically what it requires is a 75-foot setback from a county or town road center line, which is 42 feet from the right-of-way.
Yes.
This agreement requires 50 feet from the right-of-way, so it's very similar to the town's requirement, a little bit slightly more stringent. It requires that from both property lines and the right-of-way. As I understand the town ordinance, it only requires setbacks from the town right-of-way, and also it requires a 100-foot setback from anybody's residence. So what's in this developer agreement is fairly consistent with what's in the town ordinance, slightly more stringent. Okay, there were quite a few questions about the property value guarantee, and in fact, I think this isn't the easiest of the provisions in this to really understand how it would work. A little bit of legalese here. I'm guilty of that. So I thought maybe we would just walk through that generally so that everyone understands how it would work and who it would apply to. So first of all, it applies to a parcel, it applies to a residential property that at least part of the residential property is within a quarter mile of the operation footprint of the mine. The house doesn't have to be within a quarter mile, but the property on which the house is located has to be within a quarter mile, okay? If the eligibility for the guarantee begins 6 months after the final permit is issued that's required for the commencement of mining activities, it requires an owner of one of these residential properties to issue, to give a notice to Cooley that they intend to attempt to sell their property and want to be subject to the guarantee. You don't have to sign up early. You don't, within 6 months of this agreement or anything like that. It can be at any point in time during the life of the term of the agreement. The town in Cooley will work to put together a list of appraisal professionals who will be allowed to do the appraisal work for this property value guarantee. And a resident who would like to take advantage of this will pick one of those appraisers, have an appraisal done. The appraisal will be to estimate the fair market value of the property if the mine did not exist. And then after that appraisal is done, the property goes on the market, required to use a broker, and marketing effort similar to what would be standard in the industry, standard industry practices. Cooley then gets an opportunity to decide whether or not any offers that come in should be accepted. Any offers that come in that are under the fair market value, if they are a long ways under the fair market value, Cooley might say, don't accept that offer because we would rather buy it than pay the difference and not have the land, but they're going to be given that option. And that has to be on the market for 270 days. so 9 months. And if there's not an offer that they decide to have, you accept, that's under the market value, by the time this time period ends, they have to purchase the property at that fair market value. Again, absent the mine, the dollar amount that it would be worth absent the mine. That's generally the way it works. Any property that's on the market at the time that the agreement is signed can't be subject to this agreement for 3 years. If somebody takes it off the market during the process, it can't be subject to the property value guarantee again for 2 years. And once a property works through this system, it can't then again be subject to the guarantee. The total amount that Cooley's required to put forth in any particular year for property value guarantee payments is $500,000. I guess I'd be interested to know if people have questions about the property value guarantee,
Okay.
because otherwise we're gonna have to come back to that since we're gonna lose
We have a long opportunity to ask questions on that subject.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about the property value guarantees? We'll actually have some other question opportunities here as we go, but we're just gonna try to keep it in order if we can for you guys and for us. So does anybody have any questions about property value guarantees?
Yeah, Eric Nelson, 11511 Eisenhower Drive. It's a question about property value guarantees as well as well testing, because it kind of is the same thing about the distance issue. In looking through the proposal, I find it less arbitrary if instead of the half-mile and quarter-mile measurements that are instead in their place, have properties on both sides of the bounding roads be used. Because it's kind of hard to tell, you know, is it how a country crow flies, or, you know, how is it? So if the roads that were bounding these properties would be used, like, for instance, for MacArthur and Eisenhower, the north and south sides of the road. So if those properties could be included for the property value guarantee. So that makes more sense to at least myself. Or for V and Eagle, the east and west side of the road, for those properties to have the property value guarantee. Planning Commission members, please ask that these suggested boundaries be used so that if my water or my house value are negatively affected, I have some way to get that value back. You know, please get it in writing, as I'm not currently protected with the current proposal. Unless they do so, please vote no.
So, one of the other things that was on my list was the well testing. And there were some questions about how that works, so I'll jump into that. And talk about what is required under this agreement for well testing. So there's an initial monitoring requirement for a list of contaminants and circumstances, I guess, you know, which includes the reduction of water quantity. And that initial requirement is applicable to test wells that are required to be periodic testing down gradient after that first test. And the reason for that is with getting a sense for the background situation for everyone within a half a mile is tied to the alternative water supply requirement in this developer agreement. Basically, anyone who's within a half mile of the mine site is able to take advantage. Should anything go wrong with their water supply, you can take advantage of a presumption under this agreement that it's caused by the mine, at least temporarily. You can get an alternative water supply if you're within a half mile. If you're further than a half mile from the site, then you have to bring forth information that shows that would be why you're having impacts caused to your water supply. And so knowing what's present within a half mile that within that geographic boundary of where that presumption will apply is valuable to both the town and probably to the operator. The quarter-mile testing is, and the down gradient testing is based on science. There is well-settled science that supports the direction that groundwater flows and the fact that if you're testing groundwater in the direction that it flows, in monitoring wells, that it's something that doesn't skip. You get it in the direction the groundwater flows. And so testing close and on-site is by far the most important thing, because that's where you're going to find out early if there's something happening. And then this agreement requires that either the preventive action limit response or the violation limit response be implemented so that it doesn't end up even a quarter-mile away, much less a half-mile away if there's an issue. So that's the reason for the quarter-mile testing periodically. There's a twice-a-year test requirement at the monitoring wells. That is where a problem will show up first, if it shows up. That's fairly well settled in hydrology. And the half-mile is much more, I think, related to if there is an issue, let's say of quantity. Quantity isn't something you're necessarily going to see walk down the line, although that too could. But if there's a quantity issue in particular, there will be a baseline to compare that to when someone finds that they have some sort of an impact. Okay? I guess if anybody else has any questions about water testing.
Jim?
Yeah, just a couple related to that. Number one, what you just identified for the half mile is like good for the first year, correct?
Half-mile is before operation.
Before operation, okay. So, and then also, have you identified the homes that would be down gradient? And within a quarter mile, what if any homes are in that specific area? Do we know that yet?
We do.
I know we
I
do.
don't know who's, I mean, everybody who's, we know which direction is down gradient. And there's, we have a presentation on it. I mean, I don't know.
Do we have a list?
No, I don't.
No, I don't either.
I mean, that was part of the presentation.
Pardon me?
We've got diagrams.
Yes.
But we don't have a list.
A list of the actual homes involved?
No, I guess we just haven't put that together. We have diagrams.
Okay.
But that should be done. Yeah.
Right, will that be done?
We'll do.
Okay.
Well, it has to be done under the agreement, because they have to test every single, and they have to test every residential well that's within a quarter of a mile down gradient. And they have to do that. They have to test everybody within a half mile first, and then within every 3 years, they have to do that. So if someone feels like they have a well that's down gradient, it's within a quarter mile, and they're not getting tested, well, that wouldn't be appropriate if they're correct.
And again, my last question about the water quality, there were specific parameters or recommendations made by the committee to do more than that. I guess what bothers me a bit is that if there is no chance, or a very minimal chance, of other wells being contaminated further than that, why the pushback? If there's no cost or no risk, why the pushback? You're going a half a mile for the duration of the mine as recommended in the recommendations.
There is a cost. I mean, each well, probably about $500 at best.
Okay.
It's a good cost.
So I can tell you that in the number of these that we work on, the one thing that we have seen play out consistently throughout in these other places is you don't see impacts further away when you haven't seen them closer. And so requiring a test beyond that is requiring something that we would recommend will not bear any fruit. So that's why. I mean, we could go to 10 miles, but we're not going to see an issue out there It's just as simple as that.
Does it make sense to you guys, when I say that if this is the mine right here on this water bottle, and the water flows that direction, and we have test wells here, here, and here, that it should be, or, you know, it should be caught, any kind of contamination before it ever gets to here. I think that that's part of the reason why we kind of came backwards, because it gets a little bit over, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just like asking a lot too much. If we can't catch it here, by the time it gets here, it might not have come from here. I don't know if I can articulate that right or not.
And then, and to Mr. Schmidt's point, that the citizens, the ad hoc committee recommended a 1.5 mile
Right.
annual testing in all directions. So it wasn't a half mile, it was a mile and a half. And that's, I guess, it's a long ways.
Mhm.
But that information was provided by other agreements that the recommendations that were made
Mhm.
were not just something that we preferred.
Right.
It was information that we included based upon other agreements. So, and then my final question, sorry, Maureen, my final question, and specific to the whole agreement,
Sure.
there are no definitions in there. Most agreements have definitions, i.e., what's a adequate water supply? It's not bottled water, I ain't taking a shower in bottled water.
Right.
So I think that definitions need to be included in that agreement before you can approve it.
Yeah, and there's been quite a bit of talk about that, and there are quite a few definitions in here. One of them is, one is not adequate water supply. That is going to depend a great deal on the circumstances, and there will be a period of time, if someone has an impacted water supply, that they'll need something that isn't, it might be a time of year, it might be an issue where you're not gonna get a well drilled right away. And there's actually gonna be quite a few there have been quite a few situations in other contexts, this is mostly in the dairy, large dairy context, where if someone is going to have to pay for their own re-drill of a well, if it turns out that the well didn't go dry because of the mine, that provides a person with water while that question is addressed, while that's figured out. If the town requires a well to be drilled, 15 minutes after somebody calls and says, I don't have water in my well anymore, that person who owns that property is responsible for that payment if that isn't caused by the mine. And so this provides a bridge from, I've got a problem with my well, to, now what do I want to do about it if it's my problem, and if it isn't my problem, what will they do? So I think it can really cut negatively against the landowner too,
Right.
because the mine's not required to pay for a well. At the end of the day, they can recoup that cost if that's something that wasn't caused by something in their mindset. So there's some exploration that's useful there.
Right.
I mean, a permanent water supply, bottled water, you know, I think that would be, I mean, Jim's point is, that would be unacceptable if
Absolutely.
you're having a truck delivered every week.
Just to expand on that, how would you guys react to something like that? What would your response be? If I might ask that question to you guys. Is that okay?
Well, I think the first thing that we would do is get water that's, you can drink, you know, you need to
Great.
take care of that right away.
Great.
And so we'd bring in, you know, the 5-gallon bottles with a container so that there's drinking water right away.
Okay.
And then second, we would then inquire with a plumber, a consultant, to be on site like next day,
Okay.
so that other water, non-potable water, could be provided quickly. Because there's flowers that need to be, you know, watered, probably daily if it's in the hot summer. Well, there's kind of a short term, like getting drinking water in there.
Great.
And that's like within, you know, a few hours of the report. And then it's more like a day, you know, response to get more water in there that's not drinking water, but water that can be used on the property.
Great.
Well, if we look at the provision, where Jim said, where we're talking about adequate water supply, that's in section 13, sorry. So, in terms of defining what a negative impact would be that would trigger this, it includes both quality and quantity. So, that's the phrase on 13.1.1, a preventative action limit, or enforcement standard under state law, that's the quality question. Again, this is going to apply if that starts to happen from the site, and that's found in those monitoring wells, that will trigger action, hopefully resulting in this never getting to a private well. But if it does, that's your trigger in terms of what impacts would trigger this. And then also 13.12, if there's a substantial adverse impact to the quantity of water, such as the inability of a private well to provide water on a continuous basis. So if your well dries up, or, is unable to provide water after withdrawing for a short period of time. And it requires an interim water supply, and it requires that to be adequate. And it requires that if the determination is that it is caused by the mine, that a permanent alternative water supply for the property owner be provided. So there's two different stages. There's the preliminary and the permanent. I think that it's pretty clear that permanent doesn't mean trucks coming every week, but I think everyone would probably agree that means a well if it's, and I think honestly, it's a pretty good point.
Right, I agree.
And, there's certainly the recommendation you're making to the town board. We could put the word in there.
Yeah. Definition. It was a great question, Joe.
We'll vote later, but we'll just mark that, so we'll come back to that as far as whatever changes are being addressed here.
I have a question in regards to the well testing going back.
Okay.
I'm going to be a devil's advocate here.
Okay.
Let's say the well is contaminated at the site.
Great.
It's contaminated down quarter of a mile.
Okay.
Is that maybe a reason, a pretty, appropriate to check the next area, to go down even more to a half a mile? What's that process?
So you're kind of maybe a little bit more of a emergency, that's not the right word, but a situation where we've actually had something catastrophic happen.
Well, we do have that,
That's,
I think that, and we can talk about whether or not this is sufficient. But so the presumption related to that, if that shows up in that well, there's still a presumption that it's caused by the mine, between a quarter mile and a half mile. There is that presumption. And so, is there something more than that you're suggesting?
Well, what I'm suggesting is, let's say that we presume at a quarter of a mile this contamination is because of cooling, then we need to make sure that we are safe as we go down that gradient. We need to protect those wells. And I think there's something very important that needs to be looked at.
At that point, the DNR would step in.
I wanted to say that, but I didn't. I was just trying to figure out how to word that.
They'd be required to fully delineate between.
Anytime anytime that you have something that's like an active spill or a contaminant or something like that, everything has to be reported to the DNR. If you guys spill, 5 gallons of diesel fuel, you've got to call the DNR, tell them.
2 gallons of gas.
Or, yeah, 2 gallons of gas or whatever. So it actually gets looked at pretty strictly by the DNR, by the Wisconsin DNR. And
Well,
somebody you don't want on your bad side.
Well, in either way, it's, one question is about identifying the potential problem, and the other one is about providing, about taking care, not having the resident have to deal themselves with the cost of, finding a new water supply and then maybe looking to the courts for a remedy, which is often expensive and time consuming. So that presumption is, that's the purpose of that presumption, is to create that alternative water supply, create a process for that to be easier for the resident should it happen.
Correct.
Does process stop? Let's say we're waiting for the DNR
Mm-hmm.
to come, the Cooley process has to stop.
Well, far before then, okay, this is a condition of this zoning approval. If groundwater quality standards are violated at the monitoring wells, that's a violation of this zoning approval. So the zoning approval has a system within which enforcement occurs, but it would be absolutely and certainly be an enforceable circumstance, right? So, no, you don't have to wait for the DNR to enforce, you don't have to wait for the DNR to exercise or require some sort of a response activity. The town can, by adopting those standards, can take its own action under its own enforcement provisions. And actually, that's true in this agreement for a number of the different areas of regulation, including air quality, water quality, water quantity, surface water impacts, wetlands, anything required for reclamation under NR 135 in the administrative code, or anything else required under state law. Really what the town is doing, if this gets exercised, is it's gathering all that law and it's saying, we are also requiring this of you. And if you don't meet these requirements, then we can impose our controls on that activity. Up to and including revoking and suspending a license, which means then absolutely operation cease.
Correct.
Okay. So,
Further questions on that issue, or
oh yeah.
Harry, I think I have one. I
There's
have a
two
quick
of
question. So
Amy
if,
and then Sam?
so if a contaminant is found at the well site, I know that they're required to turn that into the township, but if a contaminant is found at the well site, who is responsible for notifying the immediate neighbors of the site
Well,
if that a contaminant was found and the possibility of further contamination?
Yeah, so the requirement is that testing occur and that all testing results be provided to the town. And that's as far as this agreement deals with that. But if something shows up, the idea is to get it into the hands of the town so that an appropriate response can be executed,
Okay.
right? And it would be hard to even draw probably how rapid that
I just want to know,
response-
I mean, is it something that if Cooley finds something that's well testing that
it has to be reported
they
to
have
us
to
immediately.
be reported to the town
And to the DNR. They may very well choose to communicate, but the idea here is to not rely on that, to say, get us the information, the town will make a judgment call as to how best to, whether it's personally knocking on everybody's doors or putting a sticker on the door, or it's, depending on the threat, the risk. If, for instance, if the water quantity is surprisingly, there's the drawdown area in the groundwater is more than what was expected. That would require a very different response than if, a hazardous substance was migrating quickly or something like
Sam Fox?
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to the, we kind of got into the well stuff right away and kind of stopped on the property value stuff, guarantees. I understand, you said that the well stuff is based on science, and I'm not gonna pretend to understand everything on it because I'll trust the experts on it, I guess. Where are we getting the the quarter mile for the property value guarantees only? I'll be honest, I'm one of those people that are just outside of that. And I moved out here for the quiet. 60 decibels at their mine site's gonna be awfully loud. If that's gonna be the case, I'm not vested in probably every other person in this room is in this community, being that I've lived out here for only 2 years. I will sell my property because of the mine. Why am I not able to have that same property value guarantee that other people get?
So, some of these questions, there's an answer, and it's just arbitrary. And in this case,
But hasn't the ad hoc committee asked for more? And I guess
well,
why
the ad hoc
is
committee-
the town
The ad hoc
board?
committee and some citizens have asked for more. There is no property value guarantee in our town ordinance. There's no requirement for a property value guarantee. And so, asking is asking. Okay, and what we tried to do was to balance a fairly stringent noise restriction with a property value guarantee. The more noise you allow, maybe the further out the property value guarantee would go. The less noise you allow, maybe the shorter the property value guarantee. And what you'll see if you look at agreements all around the state between communities and mines is higher noise means a deeper property value guarantee, lower noise, and they usually generally use pretty close to the same terminology that's in this agreement. And you'll see them out to a half mile is the furthest I've seen it. Very rarely, and many of them are just the adjoining properties that are actually abutting. And so this one is very much, you can have a house that's a half mile away under this property value guarantee if your parcel is large enough and you've got a piece of your parcel inside that quarter mile ring. So there's, in the discussions and negotiations, the town pushed out, and this is where we came up with. It's pretty fair to say that it's fairly average in terms of what we see around the state. Not much stricter, not less. And I preface that statement by, I don't expect that to satisfy, it's just the way the number came up.
How far away are you going to be from the mine, Sam?
Lake Crowfly is probably 0.4 miles.
How many miles?
0.4.
0.4?
I
So
thought you
not
said
quite.
20.
Eventually, right? So you're almost, not quite at half a mile?
Correct. I'm on the north side of Eisenhower.
And you're on the back side of the mine. I don't think they're even gonna be there for excavating back by, it's
Kind of right
like,
where they're starting.
oh, is it? Are you in line with that?
Yeah.
Okay, my apology.
Yeah.
So you're kind of twice the distance already, or almost twice the distance of the quarter mile. I guess I don't have a good answer for you right now, Sam.
So on water quality or water well testing or property value guarantees? Is there any more?
Any more questions on property guarantees that,
I'm gonna jump to park costs then. Some great information gathered on that topic for the last meeting. And so I thought it would be worthwhile clarifying that the payments that are made for the per ton payments for town, we call it for town costs. Those payments are 5 cents a ton, estimated, with the estimated amount of sand that will be removed, product that will be removed from this site, that comes out to about $350,000 or $360,000 over the life of the mine. And the purposes that that money can be used are limited to only costs that arise relating to enforcement of this agreement and evaluation of annual reports by specialists or consultants, things like that, or enforcement, unless, and that the rest of it is then saved for basically an escrow or a endowment for this park. And so, you know, you could expect there to be a few $100,000 in that, at that end. And that money would be used then for the park. And if the town decides not to take the park for some reason, for whatever reason, then that money then can be used for general town purposes. But as long as the town takes the park, the purpose of that funding is for that park. So I thought maybe Eric might have some questions about that.
Mr. Nelson?
No questions on that.
No questions on
But you
that?
could think about the boundary bounded by the streets again. It would take care of a lot of these concerns, just saying, you know, north and south, east and west of the mile square. Thank you.
Could you clarify what you're talking about? I'm sorry that I didn't get what
Yeah,
what you're saying.
okay, so, like, I've got map up here, so,
Okay.
you know, the proposed mine is here, right?
Great.
So, like, Sam's here, I'm here. So if you just open up the water, things, you know, as far as if our wells go dry,
Mhm.
okay? So, you know, just anything on the east and west side of these streets, north and south sides of the country square.
You mean, are you
The
talking about
properties,
for the periodic testing or for the guarantee of the well?
Guarantee of the well,
So you're not a half mile away, are you?
just over. 'Cause Sam's .4, I may be a little bit more than that.
Oh, because that's not that's a section.
You're probably about .7.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
sure.
a section, so that's a mile on a side, right?
Right. And then, you know, the property value guarantee would also be great for that area too, because, you know, we're all within, you know, that's our neighborhood. So, something to really consider. And thanks for asking about that.
So I'm trying to that's what this meeting is for you guys too tonight.
And those are boundaries we all know.
Okay. Dave Smith?
Two things. First, the only thing about that idea with the boundaries is it doesn't do anything for people north or west of B.
Okay.
And they're literally kitty corner to it.
True.
You know what I mean?
They're closest
Sounds like
to
there's
it.
a couple houses, right? And I know a gentleman sitting right back here who's right on the other side, you know, so that would cut
North
them
side,
out of that.
south side, east side, west side.
The other question I had was, if I heard you right, you said the 5 cents per ton, but I didn't hear anything in there that said that any of that money goes to the township for anything in the township other than the park. Once initially it's used for anything that has to do with the mine and
It may
enforcing
only
it.
be used for the park,
It can only be used for the park, so
or the management of, sort of the administration of the town's expenses during the life of the mine related to the.
related to the mine.
That's it.
So nothing else. It doesn't go into the coffers of the township for
Right.
roads,
Correct.
for upkeep of anything else.
Right, and so then unless the town doesn't take that property as an owner, in which case whatever they've got at that point, they can spend on regular town expenses. But as far as like, when you your point, I think periodically, no. The idea here is to earmark that for that future park plan. Speaking of the park, future park uses, I just wanted to point out that the future park uses are really up to the town to determine what those uses would be. There's been a lot of concern, I think, expressed by people who are in particular close neighbors, that this would become a campground or something like that. And I think that there must have been some talk of that early on, because it's a pretty prevalent comment that we received. And it's really up to the town to make that decision at that point, should they take that ownership. Nobody's going to force a park on anybody if that's not what the town wants.
Right. I haven't heard a lot of interest in having any kind of a campground there at this point. Who knows, 15, 20 years from now, what the public is going to want to get involved with. But
Yeah, so, I guess, future park uses, just so we can.
Are there any questions on future park usage? Nope.
Park questions generally, can we set aside the park?
Can we move on from the park? No questions about the park? I guess we can move on from that.
Okay, so one thing that has come up a number of times, and I don't think we've addressed, I haven't addressed very well, is the mechanism or the process that is being proposed here and that is required here under this agreement, and how that relates to settling ponds. And because there's quite a few people who have commented over the last few months about sand wash ponds and some of the concerns that have been raised by the DNR related to certain types of water containment structures at sand mines. So this developer agreement, should it be adopted, will require Cooley to use a filter press system for dewatering their waste. And that means that it isn't going to be put into big ponds that will, to allow it to naturally settle out. Like the pond that had to be breached in Trempealeau County last year because there was an accident, a worker that went in a piece of equipment. Those ponds will not exist. Cooley will be prohibited by law from letting any of its wastewater from its process enter into its stormwater system, which will be the only ponding on the site related to that processing area.
This method is also kind of instrumental in saving water. I mean, you could use the opportunity to keep reusing the same water without having to extract as much from the ground. Jim, go ahead.
I just got a comment about that.
Sure.
The presentation that was made by Dr. Severson identified the relative water use, and this is the slide, that there was great emphasis placed on the single point irrigation system of 1.4 million gallons. And I trusted that, and I confirmed that with an agency who sells that type of irrigation system. But emphasizing that point kind of overshadowed the reality that 200,000 gallons a day are going to be utilized by this process, which is 3 to 4 times greater than an industrial farming operation. So when you start qualifying like it's not a big deal, or they're doing things to conserve water, the reality is still this.
I think we're talking about two different things here. I'm talking about the press that's designed to extract the water from the sand and reuse it. Am I correct on that?
This
So,
is a closed system,
right, and that should help to reduce the amount of water
a lot.
by, I mean, a considerable amount.
But the permit still says they will utilize 200,000 gallons of water in a high-capacity well, of which the citizen said there will be no high-capacity well.
Well, of all the things that the citizens can't do, Jim, there's no realm in the world in which the citizens or this town board or this plan commission can say yes or no to a high capacity well. That's just, couldn't be clearer that that's off limits for our regulatory authority.
I understand that, but the original draft said that they may put in a high-capacity well, and it wasn't until our Wood County Water and Land Conservationist encouraged them to put in a high-capacity well that it became a part of that plan. That's a concern.
That is what happened.
That's,
So, blasting. To be clear, and I've said this before, the town recommended that this agreement include a provision identifying how blasting would occur if it has to occur. Cooley set actually, to Jim's point about the high-capacity well, this is also something that the Wood County conservationists and the people that were reviewing the reclamation permit suggested, that we could have allowed this to go through without any blasting, but instead what we did was we created an extremely stringent process by which blasting would be regulated under this ordinance. I'm sorry, under this agreement. We don't have blasting regulations under the town's ordinance. And so this was an opportunity to say, but if you need blasting, we would like for you to agree to do it in this manner, that you are required to do surveys of structures so that if there's damage caused by the blasting, that is something that there would be a before and after to be able to identify that cause, that there's notification requirements, extremely limited hours, and all the things that would, if blasting then became necessary, the town has in place a system that's very, very restrictive, as opposed to not putting it in here and blasting becomes necessary and the town's out of the game, okay? So that was the town's suggestion, not Cooley's suggestion. I know they've taken a lot of criticism for having a blasting provision in here, but that was because it's the best way for the town to manage that should it ever occur, okay? And then lastly, enforcement. There's been a lot of questions about enforcement and who in the town can do what. So in section, I think it's 22, one of the things that is lacking in our town zoning ordinance is a robust system for managing enforcement of any zoning violations. And so what we have here in this agreement is an applicant agreeing to a full set of enforcement provisions that probably look a lot like what we'll have in a future zoning ordinance for the town. It clarifies that there's a right for the town to be on site to inspect. It provides for the time period in which if something is found to be wrong, the company can bring that back into compliance. It provides a list of possible remedies and up to and including a suspension or revocation in extreme situations. It provides for identification of what it means for a project to be abandoned, a hearing process, and penalties. So the answer to the question is who would do what. Now that would be up to the town to decide whether they would want to. It kind of depends on what the problem might be. If there was an issue with dust, they might go hire a consultant to prepare a report, and then they might have to take somebody to court. They might have to issue a citation. They might have to go for an injunction to stop a certain activity. It all depends on the circumstance of the situation, but at the end of the day, if there's not compliance, these procedures allow the town to step in to create disincentives for continuing those activities, and to, if the requirements of the agreement are not adhered to, then to suspend or revoke the permit. So that is my list of what I read and what I heard in the meeting. If you want to, let's see if anybody has any question about enforcement. Otherwise, we can see if there's some other questions that we may
I have
have.
a real easy, straight to the point question on enforcement. The mine starts operation in the summer. I call and say they're being too loud. Take me through what happens.
Okay, so for that particular scenario, there's a specific pathway in this agreement, and what you would be triggering there is a requirement that they have a third party test their noise levels.
Those for 10 days a year.
For 10 days, so
Yes.
if you don't make that complaint, they're required to test for 10 days, for a 10-day stretch. I believe it's twice a year. And if you complain and you say, I don't think their reporting is correct, they're being too loud, then they're required to hire a third party that reports to the town. And if that shows an issue, then they're in violation. They move into the enforcement.
But we don't have, our town doesn't have anybody that can issue a citation, or it's like I said. Huh?
Yeah. That guy sitting back there with the reading glasses on could certainly do it.
Citation authority?
He does not have that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's, okay.
Well, officer?
Yeah.
Fox?
It's a different kind of citation.
It is.
Are you asking for the job, or?
Absolutely not.
Come on, get involved.
I mean, it may take a, you know, a decision or convening of the town board if this happens to say, okay, how do we want to deal with these things? Do we want to get somebody who's got a law enforcement background? Do we want it to be, I mean, zoning administrators write citations all the time, all over the state, so.
Even though it's not identified in the town board documents anywhere.
It's right in here.
Citation
And
authority.
it's in our zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinance is a $200 citation, it's in the zoning ordinance.
$200.
I wasn't aware of that.
Per day, what's that?
I wasn't aware of that.
I've just never, I usually can negotiate with people. I've never had to deal with something like this, and even with the other mine that opened up on Bluff Road, if I had a problem, the only problem I ever had was a little bit of sand on the road. I called the operator and I said, hey, we got some sand on the road, and he says, okay, I'll take care of it, and he did. So, you know, I've been very fortunate that I haven't had to double fee or assess any kind of fine so far. People are usually willing to work with us. I know this is a totally different type of situation, but definitely, you know, if it requires that the citation has to be issued, I'll take it to that level. Usually we can hopefully work something out that we don't have to, so.
There may very well be some decisions made with, you know, an evolution of the zoning ordinance to have that be more clear how that will, you know, a lot of towns have, they call them patrolmen, or they'll designate someone to do some of these. It's some of the real specific town issues, noxious weeds, things like that.
Right.
And there's some decision making, but that authority is there, and it could be exercised in a number of different ways, excuse me.
Stand up. Stand up.
Oh, please,
Yeah, I got a question on
Your
that
name?
property values.
your name, sir?
Don Workis,
Don?
my guard, 11799 MacArthur Drive.
Yes.
I'm on the west side. My property lines up all the way across where they gonna put that pit in. Well, if I wanna build a house on that corner, I can. But my property value goes down, how can I sell that land for put a house in there? And I got a well there and a driver in there.
You have a well there already?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And you want to build on the Highway V side?
On 100 Highway B side.
Okay,
And I can go there, 'cause
okay. It's got how many acres do you have there?
I got 9 acres there.
Yeah, and you've got definitely 500 feet of road frontage there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the,
So your question is,
Well,
you wouldn't want to build there maybe because
okay,
of...
my property value is gonna drop.
Okay.
You know, if you don't pay to put a house up there, you have me put a house there in a building site. It's a building site there.
I mean, he's reading the property value guarantee correctly.
Right.
When there's no residence there, it's not, it wouldn't be subject to this guarantee.
Because it's not a residence there. Okay.
So vacant land, well or not, is not included under this guarantee.
Okay.
So I still want to do that. But I just want to see if there's other questions first.
Right. Does anybody in the public have any more questions?
About anything?
Sure.
Yeah. I didn't say it before, Jim Schmidt, 8975 County Road here. I don't like talking to people, my back to people, so I'm going to go over here.
My questions are very specific to the zoning ordinance itself and the task that you're all confronted with here this evening. Specifically, well, let me qualify. There are 8 to 10 other people that live a whole lot closer to myself and my wife to this proposed mine. So there's a whole lot more people, in my opinion, that are paying a far greater price than those who do not live adjacent to the mine.
Your question?
Question is, number one, is the property owned by Carbo Ceramics within a secondary conservation area? If so, is the development designed to promote the preservation of natural features, including significant wildlife habitat, sensitive environmental lands, and scenic vistas?
Okay.
I don't know if you want to go through, we already went through the first, all the findings and the developer agreement speak specifically to this question. So the provision that you just cited, can you show me, Jim, tell me the page.
I don't have the page with me here, but it is identified directly.
No, I'm
in the zoning.
I'm not questioning
Yeah,
that.
no, and my point in asking that question is that there are special considerations if it is in a secondary environmental area.
Yeah, so the answer to your question is, if this commission and the town board agree with what's in here, then the answer is, as it's written in here, which I just talked about, which is that the town finds the following with respect to the zoning ordinance sections relevant to approval of non-metallic mining as a conditional use. This is under letter I, number 1, secondary conservation areas. The town has discretionary authority under these provisions to require development to be designed to promote the preservation of natural features, including significant wildlife habitat, sensitive environmental lands, and scenic vistas. The town, without deciding to exercise this authority, finds that the proposed mining activity is designed to promote these outcomes. Reasons for this conclusion include that only already disturbed agricultural land is proposed to be excavated, the enhancement of wetlands and creation of a lake are expected to provide enhanced wildlife habitat, existing wetlands will be preserved, and the project is temporary in nature. So again, remember, to my first comment, these findings are prepared for the purpose of, is this a good enough yes, right? So when I read that, I'm speaking the town this and the town, this is for you all and the town board to decide if that's a finding that they want to make. But if they want to approve this under that standard, this is the way we would recommend it be done.
Okay. My other questions may be related to that then, just based upon what you said, but I guess, and this is for either the planning commissioner or Mr. Konopacki. In your opinion, does the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the conditional use in any foreseeable manner substantially impair or diminish the use, values, and enjoyment of other property in the neighborhood use for purposes already permitted?
And
That's a pretty broad question there.
Yeah.
Well, but it's specifically identified in our zoning ordinance, and it should be a stipulation to use to deny or approve it for conditional
Well,
use
and
permit.
I don't want to speak for all of you. If you want to give your own opinions, I'll tell you again what's in here, but we've already been through it, so it's.
I think he deserves an answer based
Okay.
on what we have written.
All right, so the town finds, this is to the particular zoning provision that Jim just cited, 503A, Jim?
Okay.
Is that the one you were just?
I don't have a number
Would you,
now, but-
would you mind reading it back? I just wanna-
Sure, it's specific, it's under B, that the uses, values, and enjoyment of other property in neighborhood used for purposes already permitted
Okay,
shall be in no foreseeable manner substantially impaired or diminished by establishment, maintenance, or operation of the conditional use.
okay.
So I put it in form
I
of
went to
a
B,
question.
I was in A.
Yep.
So for after citing that, what you just read, this says, For the reasons stated above, in particular because of the temporary nature of the proposed use, the significant controls that will be in place during the use, the property value guarantee contained herein, and the beneficial proposed end use of the property, the town finds that the use of other neighboring property will not be substantially diminished or impaired by this proposed use.
Thank you. And the other question may be related to that as well, and maybe you've already addressed it. I apologize for not having it in front of me as well, but, and then lastly, again, as I just stated, in your opinion, will the establishment of this conditional use permit impede the normal early development and improvement of the surrounding property uses currently permitted in the district? My assumption is you've got another point in there you'd like to make as well.
Well, I want to see first if anyone else wants to provide an opinion on.
Jeff, you? I would.
Okay, so this is what
I'd like
this
to
says.
refer what's written, what we have.
So what we have written is, the town finds that all existing neighboring land uses can continue if the proposed use is authorized, that there is not significant current pressure to change, redevelop, or expand existing land uses. The temporary nature of this proposed use allows for future development in that area should the proposed use hinder interest in development temporarily, and the beneficial proposed end use of the property may enhance future development interest.
Thank you. A couple other questions that are more specific to, again, the zoning ordinance as it relates to Act 67. And this is a question for either, again, Chairman Wallace or Attorney Konopacki. In your opinion, could the information provided by the Citizens Committee and others in the township be legally characterized as defendable substantial evidence? Substantial evidence in quotation marks.
All of it? No. Some of it? Yes. I
So
don't-
some of it-
Without actually, cracking open the book and restudying everything, I did think that you raised some defendable points, and I think that some of them, are based on fact, and some are based on something that I can't verify, I can't quantify. Is that,
I would, I may very well be put into a position at some point where those points are what this town decides to move forward on, and so I'm certainly not going to criticize them here.
Okay. And the second thing, I guess,
If the answer becomes no,
yeah,
right, I mean, that's basically what we're going to use to support that no, right?
yeah, that's
So
what
I don't want to
to.
criticize them and.
Yeah, again, I want to get an idea of whether, as our attorney, I guess it would be defendable or not, that the information provided here and other information provided, is it qualified as being substantial evidence or not?
we are far from done with the information that you guys have provided. And you may see it, I think this is Larry indicated, coming up here in the future in alterations to the zoning that we have. So,
And perhaps likely to get a similar response to this question. I guess, and this is from Mr. Konopacki, as our attorney, could you defend the stipulations recommended by the committee as being reasonable and to the extent practicable and measurable? Again, that's an Act 67 requirement.
I may end up in a position where I have to do that.
Okay.
And so I don't want to criticize those, that
Okay.
wouldn't be in the best interest of the town for me to criticize those points.
Understand. And just a few more here. Has the planning commission individually or collectively used a similar approach as SMEAC? And again, we use the approach of we need information to make an informed decision and a trust but verify type of approach. So has the planning commission individually or collectively used a similar type of approach to assist in making an informed decision regarding this conditional use permit? And if so, could you provide a couple examples so we have an idea? Because there's concern about there that all the information is not being reviewed, and we're just taking information from a single source or a similar source of information. Because there's been opportunities that I've made and others have made opportunity to present other testimony from other people that are not closely related to or tied to the frac sand industry.
certainly. My response to that is, I have provided everybody with all the information as I get it, and I try to yield questions for Jeff and Dustin. Darcy really hasn't, he kind of seems to know a little bit more about some of what's going on where he doesn't have to ask me questions, he just asks for the information. We cannot like sit down and discuss this privately. Okay, this has to be in a meeting, and I think that we've done all of our planning and zoning meetings in an open forum. So, based on that, I guess I would query my other members here. Do you feel you can give an adequate information? Justin, do you feel that way?
Yeah.
Darcy?
Yes, I do, and you went way beyond researching on your end as to what could be positive and negative effects of having the mine here. And I evaluated them, and I think some of the things that we've done here and putting this agreement together is showing some of that.
And that's where we started with the categories, all the categories from that report.
And if I don't have answers, I've been referring my other members to, encouraging them to ask Larry, you know, what can we find out? How do we find out about this? Without actually having a you know, conversation about it or discussion.
Okay.
So some examples you wanted?
Yeah, if you had any examples.
And the best thing I could say is that when we sat down in discussions with Cooley's representatives, the starting point for discussions was that book and the report that sticks right on the top of it. And I don't know that there's a better example than that. That was, you know, there was a few things in there that weren't really related to what you put into an actual deal. You know, do we as a town want to be in the tracking, you know, things like that weren't. But everything else that was in there was the starting point for discussions, and it established a baseline for negotiations and discussions that was extremely helpful.
I think it set the tone, you know,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay.
I can honestly say 10 years ago, without your efforts, this would have went
A lot of
through
people's efforts.
quite rapidly, you know, without the attention that it has received because of your questions and statements and comments. And we based a lot of our information gathering off from your book.
Thank you. And I just touched on it briefly. Will there be another opportunity to provide additional information from other experts as requested? And I know that you went through a few of the questions that were asked by people, and there were a few that weren't addressed that I had asked. That was one of them. Will there be additional opportunities to have other experts that have perhaps a different viewpoint on the information that's provided? And I asked that because I simply did my own research very quickly and looked at and did some research on the presentation that Dr. Severson made. And I found some things that were concerning. I'll just leave it at that.
Larry, I'm going to let you answer that one.
Oh, you just, I didn't see.
Well, the question is, will there be an opportunity for additional testimony? Well, I'll ask the commission then.
No, there will not be,
Okay.
unfortunately.
All right, and my final question is, now that there are only 4 members on the planning commission making a decision, who will cast the deciding vote? If there's a division amongst
If there's a division amongst us,
If the vote is 2-2,
Yes.
then it will move on to the town board with no recommendation.
Thank you.
thank you. Other questions? I do. I just want to, ma'am?
So, Rand, throughout the meeting occurred, if the town accepts the property for a park, what happens if the town does not accept that property for a park? Then what happens to that property when it's all done?
Larry, go ahead.
Sure.
I think that'd be a great one for you.
We've had to decide whether or not to minimize the risk of being able to take the property, or to make it really easy to do something different and not take the property. What we've chosen is to eliminate the risk of being able to take the property, so that it will be there in 12 to 20 years when this is done. And so what would come out of this at the end, if the town decided not to take ownership, is the town would still hold a recreational easement to all the property that had been opened and was therefore subject to reclamation. And so the town would really still have, I mean, it's basically what we're saying is it's gonna be a park.
But would the county just take over?
Somebody else could take over, or the town could get, for, you know, negotiate to give those easements back if it wasn't something that was, where people were interested in which case it just would become private land again, and it could, anything could be done with it the same as could be done with the gentleman on the west side. So it's the town's decision, though, it's fully the town's decision as to whether or not to take control of that property after the mining is complete.
Dave Smith?
Yeah, just two things. One, I noticed that nothing was really changed at all with the hours of operation, which I think that was probably one of the biggest deals for a lot of people, because that takes care of a lot of things like light, sound, all that. Because 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., that's most people's lives, you know, during daylight. Just make that point. And I guess when you look at this and hearing Jim talk about the zoning that we currently have, most of the answers in that document there address that this is temporary and potentially go up to 20 years, right? And all about maintaining the quality of the area, the aesthetics, the life that everybody has here. But almost everything is the answer ends up being the park at the end of the project. So for me looking at it, there's not really any benefit that I can see to the town during this whole process. So I guess the decision seems to be, if we're gonna follow what most people here had voted for in the past, or one is the quality of life of living out here, it's weighing the quality of life of the property owners in the township for up to 20 years, or do we care about a potential quality of life that happens at the end of that 20 years, 12 to 20 years of the zoning, of the conditional use permit? It seems like that's kind of the question that's on the table is.
I'm gonna mention something, that the discussion with Doug and Carwell and the people at Carwell and Cooley, we have talked, they had suggested that they would possibly start, when they start doing the sand operation, and when they excavate enough of it out, or remove enough, to start creating a lake that, with what time span are we looking at, possibly? Any idea?
3 years?
3 years, yeah, we could start opening up.
Yeah.
So that's what the town wants. We could change the area that we're mining to get better access, provide a temporary park sooner, much sooner.
Does that make you feel any better about it at all? And a little bit
In
more
3 years,
comfortable?
we could be looking at something that's bigger than the school forest pond right now. And also, my intent, and I've been talking with students and people that actually have degrees with the Forestry Service and Fish and Wildlife about using this as a test site to get like different kind of species for aquatic life and different types of vegetation growing in here way sooner than that 12 to 20 year mark. We'd be working on that as we go to see what's going to flourish and what isn't. I don't know if that
I hear what you're saying.
probably doesn't make you feel
Well,
any better.
well, for me, you know, I don't live right there, and I have to think about if I'm a person who lives right there, you know,
Right.
like Sam, that sounds great, potentially. But if I live right there, that means absolutely nothing to me, because
Okay.
I'm going through this for 12 to 20 years.
Understand.
You know, so that, I understand what you're saying.
Well, I'm trying to make the best out of
Right.
something that maybe isn't going to make everybody happy in that respect. Kim?
Wow, so is that in the agreement, this possible 3 years?
We did not have that as
So
a
that's
contractual
just-
agreement.
That's
So-
just air views. Yeah.
Pardon me?
That's just words then, and it's not,
Right, well, I'm hoping that they stick to their word on that, so.
Is
But
that
you're
what the
right.
town wants?
You're right, Kim.
there would have to be some additional discussion about stick to Yeah, if there's any more questions there.
More questions, any more? Folks? You have a question? Please ask.
So the agreement as written is what we're voting yes or no on tonight. There's no potential to reevaluate said agreement before we vote yes or no.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So we can vote for table.
Yeah, we can change it.
So, the one thing that we had left that we wanted to continue to do, or wanted to do tonight, was to walk through, at a very high level at least, the ad hoc committee recommendations, and compare that to what was requested by them. Everybody compare that to what's draft agreement. And so, I'll run through that. We've hit a number of these and some of the other questions or points that I've made, or that we've already talked about. Under the, so I'm on page 9 of the summary, if anyone has their ad hoc committee recommendations. The first, so this is, just to be clear, the ad hoc committee did recommend first denial, and provided reasoning behind that and so on. I don't want to make it sound as if these recommended.
Just to clarify, we didn't recommend denial, we said there was substantial evidence to deny. We recognize substantial evidence to deny. That was our recommendation.
Okay.
It means the same thing, I guess, but just to clarify.
No, I mean, I think it's important, right?
Yeah.
It would mean a lot to me if I was sitting in the front row on this side, but I should have stated that differently.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, so the first thing it said was, there is substantial evidence to deny, and the second thing that was said was, if it's not denied, and then there's a number of recommendations, and those are what I wanted to walk through. We don't have time probably to go through every one of them, but if I miss something that's important to someone, we can certainly go back. We already talked about groundwater testing and the distances from the mine site that groundwater would be tested in private wells, and the water quality or the water guarantee would apply. And there's a suggestion here that the Dustman water data stream should be accessible via the internet. I do understand that that is going to be the case. We already talked about the high capacity well recommendation. There's a recommendation here that no dredging should occur. That is a requirement in the developer agreement. So that was accepted and added. Air quality, no dust shall leave the boundaries of the plant. That is the standard that the mine will be required to operate as requested. Including no visible emissions of dust, and immediate action under the fugitive dust control plan if dust emissions are observed leaving the site. So that is part of the as requested by the ad hoc committee is in the developer agreement. There is no requirement for property owners to do their own dust sampling. This was a request in this document. 400-foot blacktop turnout lane. Actually, I meant to mention that when I talked about Pete's discussion, or the chairman's discussion with the county, whether or not there's a turnout lane along Highway B or not is a question for the county. At this point, I'm told that they don't think that the traffic from this site would justify that, but that is also something that the county is going to watch with respect to the use of its road. Then lastly, in this section 2, the sand piles, the recommendation would be that all sand piles would be enclosed. That is not a requirement of this developer agreement. Public health and safety, some of these things are repeat somewhat, but as to the first three bullets on this page, it's inspections and corrective measures. The developer agreement includes, and also what has been submitted by Cooley are response requirements related to dust, response requirements related to hazardous materials, abatement plan for dust. We talked in detail about what would happen if there's water issues. So some of these things, I think, in not these words are included. There's a recommendation here that the town require testing for particulate material, air quality at 2.5. I believe that's micrometer.
Microns.
Microns,
yes.
right. Yeah, that is not a requirement in the developer agreement. I think that the best way to explain why that is you can look at the presentation that Kent Severson gave about the relevance of PM 2.5 in the sand mining context. There's certainly people who disagree with that approach and that belief, but that is not a requirement in this. Independent engineering firm, that was done and paid for by Cooley Frac Sand, actually 2 independent engineering firms, depending on how you use the word firm. Hours of operation, actually the hours of operation requested in this document are very close to what's in this agreement. Prohibited during school bus hours, that's correct, that's included in the agreement. General plan hours of operation, it said here 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday, and what we have is 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., I'm sorry, Monday through Friday. 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the developer agreement, actually an hour less on Saturdays. The ad hoc committee recommended 6 a.m. to noon, but on Saturdays, the agreement only allows 7 a.m. to noon. No work on Sundays or legally scheduled holidays, that's consistent with the agreement. The hauling hours, this recommends 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. As I noted before, the hauling hours in the developer agreement are 24 hours. Excavation, washing, crushing, so this is separated in the developer agreement. The excavation is 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. initially at least, and the washing, crushing hours are not limited. The washing and, I'm sorry, not crushing. The washing hours, there's no crushing. The washing hours are 24 hours a day in the plant. The request was that no trucks, was there a question? Sorry.
If you're gonna have blasting,
Okay. No trucks shall stage off on the roadway. That's correct, that's not going to be allowed. The county won't allow that. No other use of the byproducts of the washing shall leave the premises. That's true except for up to 20 loads of sand sold locally for things like bedding for livestock. No sound beyond 45 decibels, obviously we talked about that. The standard is 62.5 daytime, 60 nighttime. Temporary structure to enclose the crusher. There's no requirement, equipment-specific requirement in the developer agreement because they just have to meet the noise requirement. However they do that. If they have a piece of equipment that's violating that, they're going to have to do exactly that, cover it up, enclose it, do something. But this was specific to the crusher, and there isn't a crusher in this activity. No blasting, we covered that, and no dredging. I'm on to number 5, lighting. Exterior lights shall be limited to hours of agreed operation, and only 3 exterior lights. That's a question I'd have for the chairman of the ad hoc committee. How did you come up with 3?
That was a recommendation, so, yeah, I mean, again, we had 2 weeks to put this
Yeah,
together.
I mean, I'm sure a lot
So
of
that
thought
one
went
in
into that number.
particular, yeah, that one in particular, I understand you've addressed that.
Well, we required it to be minimum.
For safety purposes.
So the wording that we have in the developer agreement is very restrictive on lighting, and it covers almost everything in this lighting request. It may end up that that number is actually, from what we've heard, might actually be the number for exterior lights at nighttime, or very, very close to that number. So there will be, that's actually the reason why I asked how you came up with that number, because it seems like it's
I think I know
actually the
why.
number.
Came from another
I think,
agreement,
I think
actually.
it was
Yeah.
either the other agreement or the tour of the plant.
The tour
Oh, yeah,
itself.
okay.
So we didn't want anything more than what they currently had.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
But I thought it was pretty spot on, considering they're talking about not doing much more than that, so.
The plan was to make it doable.
What's that?
The plan was to have that be doable.
I can't do it.
But still say
Have
it.
a dual, like I said.
Who's speaking?
Oh, Eric,
Okay, Eric?
yeah. The plan was for all those recommendations to be possible. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Well, and certainly in the lighting, there, this is, I think you can say that most everything here, in terms of shrouding and everything else, is included. Okay, economics, there's nothing in this about economics. Property value guarantee is included. I didn't, we've gone through the property value guarantee. There were some specific requests with respect to how the property value guarantee be designed in the ad hoc committee. There are some things where the property value guarantee certainly is less than what was in there, and there's some things where it's stronger. I would say that the key things would be, there was a requirement that a person be paid 120% of their fair market value, and obviously, from what I just described earlier, it's only 100%. It's the actual fair market value, and there's no additional 20% on that market value. A lot of the other provisions are really very similar. I honestly don't know the geographic coverage under that recommendation. I don't remember having seen one, but maybe somebody can comment after I'm done here on that. Okay. Township costs. The suggestion was that there be a cost-benefit analysis for the township potential loss or gains of funds in property taxes, property value, roadway repair, maintenance of the park and wetland. Obviously, some of that has been provided, and some of it has not. Truck traffic. No truck traffic no trucks waiting on the roadway. That is consistent with the plans here. No incoming trucks bringing sand in from other properties for processing. That is also a requirement in this agreement. Only 3 total trucks. There is no limit on the number of trucks in the developer agreement. Prohibition on jake brakes and only using white noise backup alarms. Those are included in the developer agreement. Screening. I'm not certain exactly what the first bullet requires under the ad hoc committee recommendations, but of all the things in terms of the planning for this mine that are the most developed, it's the screening plan. The screening plan is more developed than I've ever seen. It shows in a general sense, in a specific sense, actually what can be expected to be seen from each of the neighboring properties based on the location and height of the berms. And I'm not sure how consistent that is with this first bullet. There isn't a restriction against cutting any existing trees, although the screening plan does, you got a question as soon as I'm done. The screening plan does utilize existing trees significantly for additional screening plan.
Dr. Edka, what's going to happen to the berms at the end of this? Are they going to stay? Are they going to get leveled out?
They'll get removed, and that material will be used.
It'll be reclaimed and that material will be leveled back out.
Okay.
Yes.
Berm maintenance, there was a request here that the berms be mowed once a month. That's not included in the developer agreement. The number of years was suggested to be 10 years for the CUP. The CUP is 20 years under this developer agreement with opportunity for additional years if it's extended. There was a request that a third party be engaged to ensure the use of native grasses and flowers as directed by the Wood County Land Conservation Department. There's not a provision on developer agreement related to that. Cooley Frac shall be sufficiently bonded to ensure reclamation. That is something that's handled by the county. The county has told us that they have addressed that with Cooley and that they have either their bond in place or or the plans to do so that are sufficient.
Do you guys have an approved reclamation plan with Wood County?
Yeah, financial assurance.
And the financial assurance then is already in place. Okay. Maintenance and cost of property post-reclamation, we talked about that. The one thing I would point out is that there were a couple times in this document, it was suggested that protection for area neighboring water supplies be extended beyond the end of the life of this mine, and I just wanted to note that that's not the case in this developer agreement. The requirement for that bond to cover alternative water supplies only lasts as long as the agreement lasts, which ends when mining is over and reclamation is complete. Now, reclamation can take a considerable amount of time, and until that reclamation is done, that would still stay in place. So there will certainly be significant time after mining is done that bonding or that financial assurance for well protection will be in place, but it doesn't specify a certain period, a number of years that it would be. There's some commentary here about what the town should do for next, if there is a next request for a sand mine. There's certainly been some talk about what that will look like and moving forward on that, but it's not relevant to this particular agreement. And then with respect to monetary compensation, the suggestion was to charge 25 cents a ton. As we mentioned before, Cooley has agreed to pay 5 cents a ton for the purposes that we talked about, to be used for the purposes that we discussed. Owner-operator of the proposed mine shall pay all attorney, consulting, and legal fees. They have done that to date. And when practical, Cooley Frac Sand shall hire local contractors and personnel. And there is to the extent really we can do so under the law, there's a provision in the agreement that says that they'll at least attempt to do that. And then the last question we already covered, which wasn't something that would be relevant for this. So at a high level, that's how the developer agreement compares to those recommendations. As you can see, there's something in almost every one of those recommendations, whether that was the particular numerical value was agreed to or not, or was suggested or not, is usually they weren't, but all those categories were addressed in that agreement. I'm gonna go get some more.
I've got someone that's not open. I ask everybody for their patience and excuse me for a couple minutes. I'm gonna blow my nose.
Here you are.
Please do, yes.
I guess any other questions? That was a lot to read through kind of quickly. Is there anything I missed that anybody wants to add or ask a question? It's weird to be calling on the chairman for.
Sorry. Thank you. Been in the store for 9962 Prairie Rock Road. I just would like you to sort of clarify because it's been brought up a number of times about the hours of operation, and I know that is a big concern that was brought up tonight, was brought up at the other time also. As far as the 6 to 8, how that falls in to sort of explain that, because there's different parameters for the hours of operation that we took all of the recommendations and we were very diligent about making sure, because yes, you're right, it's your homes, it's your outside, and it's very important that we sort of spell out exactly how he came to this portion of the agreement, if you would.
Sure, and to start out with, one of the things that's particular to this agreement is that the noise, the hours of operation is obviously very related to noise, as Chairman said. And one of the things I missed when I talked about the noise evaluation is that's a measure that's made at the boundary of the mine site, not at a residence. And so that's a factor to always pay attention to when you see these. Oftentimes these are written at a residence. So the hours of operation, general excavation activities can occur from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to noon on Saturday, none on Sunday or on legal holidays. General excavation means the removal of material from an excavation site, after the topsoil and overburden had been removed. So this is the product that they're after, the mined product. And that's after the appropriate berms and other screening has been in place. So the 6 to 8 p.m. is behind the berms, behind the screening, okay? It doesn't include the operation of a single excavator or loader to feed the raw product into a slurry system if they go with a slurry system, because that will that's a slower process for getting material to the processing plant and would run 24 hours a day, but overall would be quieter and would have less traffic noise within the site. The excavation preparation activities, which means removal or movement of topsoil, overburden, or other material for the construction or placement of screening berms or other screening methods, so berm building, and other material for the construction or placement of screening berms or, stormwater infiltration ponds, grading, site preparation and construction of the driveway area and the plant area. Those activities may only occur from 7 a.m. from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So those activities that aren't behind the berms and behind the screening plan can only happen from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And as I said before, the different types of activities that are included in that were expanded pretty significantly from the last version that you've seen till this version. So anything related to setting up the plant, the driveway, and any of the berm work is 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then we already talked about 24 hours a day for trucking, and I think that, and we already talked about 24 hours a day for the wash plant, the internal operations of the wash plant. So those are the categories with respect to the hours of operation. Most of the intent is that most of the work that doesn't happen behind the berms and the screening and the noise screening would only be occurring between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Because that is probably going to be the most noticeable, certainly visually and potentially from a noise perspective.
Sorry, Larry. Question.
Okay.
Wasn't it mentioned earlier about the school bus hours? That's
Yes.
actually not written in here? If I'm reading that paragraph correctly?
Yeah, that doesn't show, that shows up in the road section.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's just not.
And actually, this is an easier site than most with respect to that, because really all of the student movement that's through busing in the area is through the same busing company, and they reached out directly to them, and it seems like that's going to be fairly easy to coordinate. I can't figure out when to pick my kids up from school, but apparently they've got it pretty well figured out when they should be.
They're at my house at 6:38 in the morning.
James?
Just got a question specific to the potential favorable vote for this agreement. The three questions I had initially were answered, verbatim out of the written statement that you provided, the attorney contact you provided. Aren't we setting a dangerous precedent by relying upon the definition of this is temporary for any other future conditional use permit by applying that logic from something that could last 12 to 20 years or greater after that point? Is that kind of a dangerous precedence being set?
Well, yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah, and this is good, it's a great question, because you and I have talked about this before. I hope that there's never another conditional use permit that's evaluated under the way this ordinance is written. And I guess that's the best thing I can say without, should we put in a position where I've got to defend a no. My recommendation to the town will be that there be far fewer, if any, conditional use permit opportunities in your zoning code as you go through a change in the near future. Zoning and conditional use permits has changed so much, it's taken so much out of the hands of the towns and other municipalities that I recommend to communities that they really shift away from that tool and require someone to come in and get a zoning change, let's say, for this kind of, for the kind of a project that you would normally think is a conditional use, because that's something you still have the discretion as to whether to do. And so little, there's so much less discretion in conditional use permits now. So I know that's not exactly what you asked, but I'm trying to not put the town in a bad position, but also to show that where I would go is I would run as far away from conditional use permits as you can. And that's what I'll be doing.
When he says near future, it's very near future. We're going to be working on changing zoning and updating zoning, giving more authority to zoning, and simplifying zoning in some areas too. So I don't know if that's the answer you wanted to hear, but
I understand
you certainly have a great question.
I understand what you're saying.
Because initially, when you want to get right down the grassroots of it, we allow in our zoning non-metallic mining. Okay, so.
Jeff? I have a question, and I think you're the best to answer this. If the town board agrees not to sign this agreement, can you walk us through the next steps?
Sure. So if the town board decides to deny this, first of all, the vote that would be taken initially, because of the way that this process has been put
Right.
forth, is the same thing for this committee, or for this commission. The only question we can answer today is does this do it?
Right.
Or with, the changing of the provision to say
Right.
a permanent solution is a well.
Yeah, right.
When we're done tweaking it, does this do it? Because we're not prepared to answer a different question than that today.
Okay.
We would have to answer questions posed by Jim, for instance,
Right.
in a very different way. Because no matter what we decide, no matter what you decide and the town board decides, it has to be supported by those kinds of conclusions.
Okay.
Or it's subject, it's open.
So basically it goes to court.
No, if the answer to is this good enough is no, then we go back and we say, okay, well, somebody direct us to write a decision that's a no,
Okay.
but that supports a no. This decision right now, saying no to this does not support a no. It just says not this.
Right.
And that's the same thing for the town board. So if the town board is considering whatever the recommendation is by this committee, and they say, nah, we're not gonna do it, then at that point, we would stop, and we would come back to the question with a written document that would support a no, and see if that then is sufficient to the people who are voting. But right now, the direction has been, see what a yes looks like.
Right, yeah.
See what that yes could be, and then see if it's acceptable. And that's all we have in front of us, and we can't do more than that until we find out if we need to go in that direction.
Okay. So, I guess my question is, if we take this all the way to court, do we lose what we already have here in this agreement, as it stands today?
If we lose in court, absolutely.
doesn't that basically come down to, we have to work with what has been preset by the state and the county, and for what conditions we adopted from the county for our zoning? And we're in this position now for the simple fact that our zoning wasn't set to the standards that we'd like to see it set. And we've had the opportunity to change it, and the other party has flexed to try to work with us in the changes that we'd like to see. But if it winds up that we deny it, they can go back to court, if I understand this correctly, and work within the parameters that are preset and say, we're gonna go forth with this. Now, we've had, if I understand it correctly, another township that tried denying it. The mining company took it to the state Supreme Court, and they lost. I think we'd be in the same position. And I think everyone needs to understand that. I think they've tried to work with us. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, you went from A to D, certainly. The challenge was that they went to the Supreme Court and the town won, and the community won. Then the legislature changed the rules. And that's what we're under the rules that have been changed as a result of that case. So I can tell you without hesitation that if that same case went through, it would have, that in particular, that set of facts would have a very different outcome. Because there was a set of conditions that were identified, and the company agreed to meet those, and they still said no. So I saw a hand in the back, and it might have been.
Oh, you answered it.
Did you have a question? Or
No,
you
he
just
answered
kinda
it, yeah, that's.
Covered that
point I was
already,
gonna make.
okay. Well, Jeff, does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, for now.
Okay, well, that was good. Where are we at on this review?
We're at, we're done with this, we're done with that, and you might want to read the motion if you want to forward that.
So Dustin has some questions here.
My name's Dustin Henderson, 7599 County Road B, for anybody that doesn't know. As I read through this and listened here, I have some questions that I feel are pertinent to everybody. Not to be adversarial or anything, I want the mine to get to moving sand, and I want people to be taken care of. But just as a quick observation, Sam was basically told his house was just a number. There was the inconsequential, this is where we need to live. There wasn't a line past it. We've all been in this room. There's the 30 of us that have been showing up or so. If there was somebody 3/4 of a mile past Sam that should be here, I think we should seriously look at the property line for the well testing and the value more. The well testing, I personally think that if the quarters where we're at, the half mile, I know you said they were expensive, $500 or so a piece, can't expect you to test everything out there. There should be a process where we should have 2 or 4 a year that we could add to the list through the town board, like Sam wants his check, whatever. We should be able to have a couple. I mean, $500 isn't much, of course, for this thing. So, really, if he hadn't said that it was just an arbitrary number that they came up with and made Sam's house arbitrary, I wouldn't have changed my opinion as hard as I have. But I can't vote for this as it stands. Thank you.
What was the recommendation there, Mr.?
I would like to see it go on the table and some of these questions be set back again. I think we're going to get a yes, in my opinion, long term, but the short term, if I've got to vote for this, I'm not comfortable with it. I was.
On the property value and.
Well, the property value, it sounds like Sam was looking for a way out, and he was told his number was arbitrary. If he'd been a 1/4 of a mile closer, it wouldn't have mattered to anybody, and it's an arbitrary number now. You didn't give me a real definition of somewhere. I would like to see, I know it's a give and take. Do we give Carbo something to get that moved? I don't know. I'm not the negotiator, but you told my neighbor his house was arbitrary, so I got an issue.
That was my words, I apologize.
Yeah, I don't mean it to be confrontational, but I saw Sam's demeanor change, and mine did too, because if it was my house, and you're telling me I'm 2/10 of a mile from being important, I'm in Sam's shoes right now, so sorry.
You asked for clarification on what the agreement that originally asked for, the property value was 5 miles. It's identified as 5 miles, to your point.
And we came about that because of an impact study and an article that was written in there
From realtors.
from realtors.
Well, I don't think we can go
I think
to the edge of the earth and back, but
Right.
2/10 of a mile at Sam's house, when nobody else past Sam's asking about it, seems to be something we should at least identify and speak about one more time.
I think that I can't disagree with Mr. Henderson on this, that these houses are close enough that it deserves some other kind of consideration. I know that this gets restrictive, it inhibits the situation.
Still faster than going to court.
Right.
So Dustin, did you say something about wells on that too?
Well, with the well, the thing that I had was, everybody's like, well, what if it's my well? Well, what if it's this well? There should be, I know they're expensive, and to make him do the whole thing is ridiculous. I understand that completely. But if we spent 2 spots a year in, for, we're talking $1,000 here. I think there should be a process that somebody should go to the town board and say, I think my well should be tested in this spot. Maher Water tests our water every 3 or 4 months when they come out and do their thing, and we've got high iron, that's just the farm we live on, but we take an active role in the water that my children consume. I know Sam will take an active role in his house. I'd just like to think that if something noticeably changed, that the town board should say yes or no, that we get his well tested.
I have a question for the people who are here tonight. Who feels affected by the distances in the agreement for the property guarantees?
Who feels affected? I'm not sure the question.
You're here and
who feels like they live really
Who's
close
outside
to
of
it?
a quarter mile?
Correct.
But
Yeah.
feels like
And
they'll
still
be
close
impacted. Yeah.
Okay, now let's go down to half a mile. Okay,
Is there anybody outside the half a mile radius?
.7.
What's your distance from the site? Your house?
I don't know.
Us personally is irrelevant, to be honest with you. I think your greater question is,
I guess I'm just trying to see how many people are within that 7/10 of a, mile there, that
Well, they're here,
half a mile,
they're here,
here.
and the people that are here are affected.
And I see where Mr. Fox is affected, and I see where Mr. Nelson is affected. Reed, is your house that close to that?
Pretty close, yeah.
How close is your house?
Oh, probably within 7/10.
My brother would be, he's on vacation, but.
I understand that, and I have actually considered him in that.
And my neighbor.
We had an analysis at one point in the discussion about how many different properties would be added to go out to the half.
Reed.
It was substantial.
The conversation we're having right now is exactly why the committee asked for an economic impact study to see what this would mean to the people in this area.
We got,
Not only the sale, but also what the taxes are what's going to happen to the taxes, if the property values go down. Your taxes we're paying in this township are going to go down as well. That's why we specifically asked for an economic analysis of the impact analysis of this. And that's why it was in.
that's what I'm saying, if we just put 2 slots in there for somebody that requests the board is looking for, it's not a lot of money. But yeah, you can't overburden the company with.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's why I say, but I think you get a level of confidence in the community if they're able to come talk to the board about, wonder, you can't make them do 50, you can't make them do 2 miles with the town. 8 provisions.
That's right.
That's
Okay, so we were just talking about options here, and one of the options would be to move a recommendation that the commission recommend to the town board that it approve this subject to further evaluation of what the appropriate property value guarantee boundary should be. We've got everyone from the town board in the room, and one more town board member to add who's out of town, the new member's out of town. And that's what you're asking me to verbalize. We would write in here approval subject to, I heard, 2 more. Adding a couple of wells a year that people could express some interest in and be designated by to Cooley as to who they should test. And then, approval subject to consideration of the appropriate, whatever that appropriate distance would be. A half a mile is a significant additional list of people, but
Absolutely.
The further away that you get, I would not mind if I had a mind. I wouldn't mind a 5 mile, a house 5 miles away, because I know from all this
Agreed.
activity that, and all the work I've done in this area, that you will not see a significant change at that distance. And I understand there's people who have written that they think that's the case, but I would not be afraid of that. It's that distance that's a lot closer. And the further you get away, and the further you get to the point where you're not actually, you don't have eyes on it, and then you may, if you get to a point where you can't see, you can't hear it, you're out. In terms of a true fair market value evaluation. And it doesn't matter if you gotta drive by it to get, no, as long as it's not on both sides. So, that's an option, and that's what you just asked me to articulate.
Right. Understand what you're saying?
Yeah. Add those 2 provisions.
Without specificity on the distance, but to allow then some additional discussion. And the town board can do as it chooses with respect to that recommendation. It can either say, we've talked to them, they don't have to give us any property value guarantee, and they're giving us this much, and it's the best we got.
Right.
So to not take it away from those who get it, because we can't get it for those who can't, maybe that's what they'll choose, or they might say a half mile, they might say 3/4 of a mile, but.
So we're letting the board set the parameters.
Yeah, the board will set the parameters, but you're sending a pretty strong signal to them that the commission's recommendation is that keeps being. I can read this if you want.
Yeah.
All right, so here's the motion.
May I say something?
You have a question?
A 2-part question, yes.
Okay.
In the commission up there, zoning and planning,
The committee.
the committee, it is in your best interest to do what's best for town citizens and the town. Am I correct? I'm gonna ask everyone. It's to look at it for a yay or a nay and do what you think is in the best interest of citizens and the township.
So your question is?
Everybody up on the committee, whatever is for a yay or a nay, when they vote, is doing that in the best interest of the town and the town's citizens.
Okay, I believe that would be correct.
Everybody has a
That's, we're following the guidelines that have been presented to us.
So you are.
Protect the town citizens.
My second part of that question is, may I poll the audience for a yay or a nay on this proposal?
If you want to poll the audience, yes, but let me be very clear about this. How many people are here tonight?
I realize this is a small portion
of the town of Rock.
I realize this is a small portion of town.
I'm going to advise my panel that whatever the audience answers you with is skewed.
We have a map that can show you how many people are interested in this topic, Harry. It's not here tonight, I don't have it tonight, I can provide it, which would not really be a fair,
But they're not here to
comparison.
vote, so. I guess with that said,
Can we ask the citizens how many are in favor? Raise their hand.
go ahead.
How many are in favor of the proposal of the conditional use permit? Okay.
Okay.
How many are opposed to the proposal? And remember, you're listening to the citizens of the town of Rock. Thank you.
There was a lot of people that didn't vote one way or another, let that be recorded.
I don't think the board
I wasn't even including the board.
or the
so.
Cooley people
Right,
didn't,
you're right.
So,
nor should.
Please, continue.
okay. Okay, motion to recommend town board approval of the request by Cooley Fraxan LLC for a conditional use permit to conduct non-metallic mining operations in the town of Rock, subject to the terms and conditions contained in the developer agreement negotiated between the town and Cooley, and to the extent required by the town zoning ordinance, and approval by the commission of the same. In support of this motion, the commission finds under the following: the planning commission has had opportunity to review and has reviewed the proposal as required under the zoning ordinance. The planning commission finds that the conditions of the town zoning ordinance are met, and the application of the conditions and terms of the developer agreement for the reasons stated in that document. Under the zoning ordinance, the planning commission finds that the developer agreement contains sufficient evidence and guarantees that Cooley will comply with the conditions and terms in that document. And lastly, the use permitted, the property, and the applicable conditions are described accurately in the developer agreement. Subject to these two changes, that the developer agreement require that 2 wells annually be added to what are tested by Cooley, private wells, as directed by the town. The town will determine the system of figuring out who to put on that list, and that prior to its approval or denial of this developer agreement, that the town board review the property value guarantee to determine the appropriate distance from the mine site for it to be approved. Which two do you want to?
I guess at this point, I would be looking for a motion to take this to a vote at this time.
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
Second, okay.
Who was the second?
Dustin was the second.
Call roll. Oh, we got, and just to note, we have Pancratz abstaining.
Yes, we did Pancratz abstaining. Okay, can we do show of hands or?
Just call the roll.
Okay. Darcy Kren, how do you vote?
With what has been added as far as the board to figure out what the parameters are going to be for the real estate evaluation, should someone decide to sell their land, and for the well testing, I'm going to vote yea and move forward.
With the additions, recommendation to the town board, I will also vote yea.
I think it's still too open-ended. I'm going to vote no.
Okay.
I'm going to vote with the recommendations added to the town board. I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
But I gotta reword it.
I'll move it to a motion to adjourn the meeting. I'll make that motion. Okay, second?
Adjourn?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll second it.
I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Are we ready to discuss?
Let's